Hello, and welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheist, agnostic, skeptic, freethinker, non-believer, formerly religious, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. Friends who are joining us online today, are you all okay? We're glad that you can be here with us too. Okay, this is our creed. At Seattle Atheist Church, we are founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We are committed to reason and evidence-based thinking on the one hand, and on the other, to compassion for our fellow human beings. And these commitments motivate us to oppose magical and wishful thinking and all forms of dogma, as well as all forms of oppression. We believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways. And if that sounds right to you, then you are in the right place. As I was just telling someone, we have met every Sunday for the past 5 years. A few exceptions, we meet on Christmas, or if it falls on Christmas or whatever. But we meet every Sunday, usually in this room. And as we all know, we had to take a big break for COVID. And today is our first day back in this room. Please sign up at Meetup if you'd like to get reminders about upcoming events. And you can see at seattleatheist.church. Okay, today is the first meeting of back in-person church that is reminiscent of the before times. And we are continuing to include those members who have joined us remotely. And so we're going to be trying something new today. This is totally new for us. Please bear with us as we kind of work through the glitches.
So, on an episode of her show in 2013, Oprah Winfrey was interviewing Diana Nyad, an American author, journalist, motivational speaker, and endurance swimmer. Nyad said, "I can stand at the beach's edge with the most devout Christian, Jew, Buddhist, going down the line, and weep with the beauty of this universe, and be moved by all of humanity. All the billions of people who have lived before us, who have loved and hurt and suffered." To which Oprah replied, "Well, I don't call you an atheist then. I think if you believe in the awe and the wonder and the mystery, then that is what God is. That is what God is. God's not the bearded guy in the sky." Oprah was suggesting that anyone who experiences awe and wonder must not be an atheist. But we know better. And some of our best writers have inspired feelings of awe within us just by describing the natural world as it really is. Learning more about the reality of the world around us in all of its wondrous complexity often prompts us to marvel at its splendor. Let's indulge in a few such secular scientific selections. I'd like to share 2 scientific creation myths with you today. A selection from Carl Sagan's Cosmos, and a selection from Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. You can even think of them as Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, but with an important difference. They're based in reality, and they don't contradict each other. Without further ado, let's get started with our selection from Carl Sagan's Cosmos, mostly from the final chapter, titled, "Who Speaks for the Earth?" It's hard to breathe through these masks. I'm like losing my breath. The cosmos was discovered only yesterday. For 1 million years, it was clear to everyone that there were no other places than the Earth. Then, in the last 0.1% of the lifetime of our species, in the instant between Aristarchus and ourselves, we reluctantly noticed that we are not center and purpose of the universe, but rather lived on a tiny and fragile world, lost in immensity and eternity, drifting in a great cosmic ocean, dotted here and there with 100 billion galaxies and 1 billion trillion stars. We have bravely tested the waters and found the ocean to our liking, resonant with our nature. Something in us recognizes the cosmos as home. We are made of stellar ash. Our origin and evolution have been tied to distant cosmic events. The exploration of the cosmos is a voyage of self-discovery. Near the site of the Alexandrian Library, there is today a headless sphinx sculpted in the time of the pharaoh Horemheb in the 18th dynasty, a millennium before Alexander the Great. Within easy view of that leonine body is a modern microwave relay tower. Between them runs an unbroken thread in the history of the human species. From sphinx to tower is an instant of cosmic time, a moment in the 15 or so billion years that have elapsed since the Big Bang. Almost all record of the passage of the universe from then to now has been scattered by the winds of time. The evidence of cosmic evolution has been more thoroughly ravaged than all the papyrus scrolls at the Alexandrian Library. And yet, through daring and intelligence, we have stolen a few glimpses of that winding path along which our ancestors and we have traveled. For unknown ages after the explosive outpouring of matter and energy of the Big Bang, the cosmos was without form. There were no galaxies, no planets, no life. Deep, impenetrable darkness was everywhere. Hydrogen atoms in the void. Here and there, denser accumulations of gas were imperceptibly growing. Globes of matter were condensing. Hydrogen raindrops, more massive than suns. Within these globes of gas was first kindled the nuclear fire latent in matter. A first generation of stars was born, flooding the cosmos with light. There were, in those times, not yet any planets to receive the light, no living creatures to admire the radiance of the heavens. Deep in the stellar furnaces, the alchemy of nuclear fusion created heavy elements, the ashes of hydrogen burning, the atomic building materials of future planets and life forms. Massive stars soon exhausted their stores of nuclear fuel. Rocked by colossal explosions, they returned most of the substance back into the thin gas from which they had once condensed. Here, in the dark, lush clouds between the stars, new raindrops made of many elements were forming. Later generations of stars were being born. Nearby, smaller raindrops grew, bodies far too little to ignite the nuclear fire. Droplets in the interstellar mist on their way to form the planets. Among them was a small world of stone and iron, the early Earth. All the elements of the Earth, except hydrogen and some helium, have been cooked by stellar alchemy billions of years ago in stars, some of which are today inconspicuous white dwarfs on the other side of the Milky Way galaxy. The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies, were made in the interiors of collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff. Congealing and warming, the Earth released the methane, ammonia, water, and hydrogen gases that had been trapped within, forming the primitive atmosphere and the first oceans. Starlight from the sun bathed and warmed the primeval Earth, drove storms, generated lightning and thunder. Volcanoes overflowed with lava. These processes disrupted molecules of the primitive atmosphere. The fragments fell back together again into more and more complex forms, which dissolved into early oceans. After a time, the seas achieved the consistency of a warm, dilute soup. Molecules were organized in complex chemical reactions driven on the surface of clays. And one day, a molecule arose that, quite by accident, was able to make crude copies of itself out of the other molecules in the rock. As time passed, more elaborate and more accurate self-replicating molecules arose. Those combinations best suited to further replication were favored by the sieve of natural selection. Those that copy better produced more copies. And the primitive organic rock gradually grew thin as it was consumed by and transformed into complex condensations of self-replicating organic molecules. Gradually, imperceptibly, life had begun. Single-celled plants evolved, and life began to generate its own food. Photosynthesis transformed the atmosphere. Sex was invented. Once free-living forms banded together to make a complex cell with specialized functions. Chemical receptors evolved, and the cosmos could taste and smell. One-celled organisms evolved into multicellular colonies, elaborating their various parts into specialized organ systems. Eyes and ears evolved, and now the cosmos could see and hear. Plants and animals discovered that the land could support life. Organisms buzzed, crawled, scuttled, lumbered, glided, flapped, shimmied, climbed, and soared. Colossal beasts thundered through the steaming jungles. Small creatures emerged, born live instead of in hard-shelled containers, with the fluid of the early oceans coursing through their veins. They survived by swiftness and cunning. And then, only a moment ago, some small arboreal animals scampered down from the trees. They became upright and taught themselves the use of tools, domesticated other animals, plants, and fire, and devised language. The ash of stellar alchemy was now emerging into consciousness. At an ever-accelerating pace, it invented writing, cities, art and science, and sent spaceships to the planets and stars. These are some of the things that hydrogen atoms do, given 15 billion years of cosmic evolution. It has the sound of epic myth, and rightly so. But it is simply a description of cosmic evolution as revealed by the science of our time. We are difficult to come by and a danger to ourselves. But any account of cosmic evolution makes it clear that all the creatures of the earth, the latest manufacturers of the galactic hydrogen industry, are beings to be cherished. For we are the local embodiment of a cosmos grown to self-awareness. We have begun to contemplate our origins, star stuff pondering the stars, organized assemblages of 10 billion, billion, billion atoms, considering the evolution of atoms, tracing the long journey by which, here at least, consciousness arose. Our loyalties are to the species and the planet. We speak for Earth. Our obligation to survive is owed not just to ourselves, but also to that cosmos, ancient and vast, from which we spring. Okay, that's all from Carl Sagan for today. Now, selection from Richard Dawkins' classic book, now in its 40th anniversary edition, The Selfish Gene. I expect there's a lot more awe-inspiration in other books by Richard Dawkins, like Unweaving the Rainbow, or The Magic of Reality, or The Greatest Show on Earth. But I'll have to confess, I haven't read those. Perhaps selections from those books will make their way into a future talk about experiencing awe as an atheist. But for now, let's continue. In the beginning was simplicity. It is difficult enough explaining how even a simple universe began. It would be even harder to explain the sudden springing up, fully armed, of complex order, life, or being capable of creating life. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection shows us a way in which simplicity could change into complexity. How unordered atoms could group themselves into ever more complex patterns until they ended up manufacturing people. Darwin's survival of the fittest is really a special case of a more general law of survival of the stable. The universe is populated by stable things. A stable thing is a collection of atoms that is permanent enough or common enough to deserve a name. It may be a unique collection of atoms that lasts long enough to be worth naming, such as the Matterhorn, a mountain in the Alps. Or it may be a class of entities, such as raindrops, that come into existence at a sufficiently high rate to deserve a collective name, even if any one of them is short-lived. The things that we see around us, and which we think of as needing explanation, rocks, galaxies, ocean waves, are all, to a greater or lesser extent, stable patterns of atoms. Sometimes when atoms meet, they link up together in chemical reaction to form molecules, which may be more or less stable. Such molecules can be very large. A crystal, such as a diamond, can be regarded as a single molecule, a proverbially stable one in this case, but also a very simple one, since its internal atomic structure is endlessly repeated. Before the coming of life on Earth, some rudimentary evolution of molecules could have occurred by ordinary processes of physics and chemistry. There's no need to think design or purpose or directedness. If a group of atoms in the presence of energy falls into a stable pattern, it will tend to stay that way. The earliest form of natural selection was simply a selection of stable forms and rejection of unstable ones. We do not know what chemical raw materials were abundant on Earth before the coming of life. But among the plausible possibilities are water, carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia. All simple compounds known to be present on at least some of the other planets in our solar system. Chemists have tried to imitate the chemical conditions of the young Earth. They have put these simple substances in a flask and supplied a source of energy such as ultraviolet light or electric sparks, artificial simulation of primordial lightning. After a few weeks of this, something interesting is usually found inside the flask. A weak brown soup containing a large number of molecules more complex than the ones originally put in. In particular, amino acids have been found, building blocks of proteins, one of the two great classes of biological molecules. Processes analogous to these must have given rise to the primeval soup, which biologists and chemists believe constituted the seas some 3,000 to 4,000 million years ago. The organic substances became locally concentrated, perhaps in drying scum around the shores or in tiny suspended droplets. Under the further influence of energy, such as ultraviolet light from the sun, they combined into larger molecules. Nowadays, larger molecules would not last long enough to be noticed. They would be quickly absorbed and broken down by bacteria or other living creatures. But bacteria and the rest of us are latecomers. And in those days of large organic molecules, they could just drift unmolested through the thickening rock. At some point, a particularly remarkable molecule was formed by accident. We will call it the replicator. It may not necessarily have been the biggest or the most complex molecule around, but it had the extraordinary property of being able to create copies of itself. This may seem like a very unlikely sort of accident to happen. So it was. Actually, a molecule that makes copies of itself is not as difficult to imagine as it seems at first. And it only had to arise once. Think of the replicator as a mold or a template. Imagine it as a large molecule consisting of a complex chain of various sorts of building block molecules. The small building blocks were abundantly available in the soup surrounding the replicator. Now suppose that each building block has an affinity for its own kind. Then whenever a building block from out in the soup lands up next to the part of the replicator for which it has an affinity, it will tend to stick there. The building blocks that attach themselves in this way will automatically be arranged in a sequence that mimics that of the replicator itself. It is easy then to think of them joining up to form a stable chain, just as in the formation of the original replicator. This process could continue as a progressive stacking up, layer upon layer. This is how crystals are formed. On the other hand, the two chains might split apart, in which case we have two replicators, each of which can go on to make further copies. Suddenly, a new kind of stability came into the world. Previously, it is probable that no particular kind of complex molecule was very abundant in the soup, because each was dependent on building blocks happening to fall by luck into a particular stable configuration. As soon as the replicator was born, it must have spread its copies rapidly throughout the seas, until the smaller building block molecules became a scarce resource, and other larger molecules were formed more and more rarely. The next important link, one that Darwin himself laid stress on, although he was talking about animals and plants and not molecules, is competition. In our picture of the replicator acting as a template or mold, we supposed it to be bathed in a soup, rich in the small building block molecules necessary to make copies. But when the replicators became numerous, building blocks must have been used up at such a rate that they became a scarce and precious resource. Different varieties or strains of replicator must have competed for them. Less favored varieties must actually become less numerous because of the competition. And ultimately, many of their lines must have gone extinct. There was a struggle for existence among replicator varieties. They did not know they were struggling. The struggle was conducted without any hard feelings. Indeed, without any feelings of any kind. But they were struggling in the sense that any miscopying that resulted in a new higher level of stability or a new way of reducing the stability of rivals was automatically preserved and multiplied. The process of improvement was cumulative. Ways of increasing stability and of decreasing rivals' stability became more elaborate and more efficient. Some of them may have even discovered how to break up molecules of rival varieties chemically and to use the building blocks so released for making their own copies. These proto-carnivores simultaneously obtained food and removed competing rivals. Other replicators perhaps discovered how to protect themselves, either chemically or by building a physical wall of protein around themselves. This may have been how the first living cells appeared. Replicators began not merely to exist, but to construct for themselves containers, vehicles for their continued existence. The replicators that survived were the ones that built survival machines for themselves to live in. The first survival machines probably consisted of nothing more than a protective coat. But making a living got steadily harder as new rivals arose with better and more effective survival machines. Survival machines got bigger and more elaborate, and the process was cumulative and progressive. Was there to be any end to the gradual improvement in the techniques and artifices used by the replicators to ensure their own continuation in the world? There would be plenty of time for improvement. What weird engines of self-preservation would the millennia bring forth? 4,000 million years on, what was to be the fate of the ancient replicators? They did not die out, for they are past masters of the survival arts. But do not look for them floating loose in the sea. They gave up that cavalier freedom long ago. Now, they swarm in huge colonies, safe inside gigantic, lumbering robots, sealed off from the outside world, communicating with it by tortuous indirect routes, manipulating it by remote control. They are in you and in me. They created us, body and mind, and their preservation is the ultimate rationale for our existence. They have come a long way, those replicators. Now they go by the name of genes, and we are their survival machines. We are all survival machines, but we does not mean just people. It embraces all animals, plants, bacteria, and viruses. Different sorts of survival machines appear very varied on the outside and in their internal organs. An octopus is nothing like a mouse, and both are quite different from an oak tree. Yet, in their fundamental chemistry, they are rather uniform. And in particular, the replicators that they bear, the genes, are basically the same kind of molecule in all of us, from bacteria to elephants. We are all survival machines for the same kind of replicator, molecules called DNA. But there are many different ways of making a living in the world, and the replicators have built a vast range of machines to exploit them. A monkey is a machine that preserves genes of trees. A fish is a machine that preserves genes in water. There is even a small worm that preserves genes in German beer mats. DNA works in mysterious ways. That's all from Dawkins for today, but I have one last selection to share with you. You know, I couldn't let this talk pass without bringing in some Greta Christina. She often writes in the first person, so when you hear me say I and me, that's Greta speaking. This is drawn mostly from the last chapter of Greta Christina's book, The Way of the Heathen. One last atheist epiphany before we go. It was at the Edwardian ball. That's not Edwardian as in King Edward VII, but as the artist Edward Gorey, known for his finely detailed, hilariously ghoulish depictions of Victoriana, Edwardiana, and Roaring Twenties Clatterdom. The Edwardian Ball started years ago as a little nightclub gig by the self-described pagan lounge band, Rose and Covet, and has mushroomed into a massive, magnificent, weekend-long event with live music, ballroom dancing, costumes, art, exhibitions, absinthe cocktails, trapeze performances, weird taxidermy displays, and more. It's where the goth, steampunk, ballroom, and historical recreation scenes collide in a magnificent explosion. I, Greta, love it passionately. It happens every year, and we never miss it if we can help it. It is a near perfect example of what I think of as the atheist meaning of life. When you don't believe in God or an afterlife, when you don't think the meaning of your life is determined by a divine force, and when you understand that humanity is just a tiny, fragile, absurdly mortal fragment in the immensity of space and time, you have to seriously rethink the whole question of what life means. The meaning of life isn't pleasing God and going to heaven, or perfecting your soul for the next reincarnation, or working towards the enlightenment of the world soul. And humanity isn't a singularly beloved creation with a special destiny. We're just an unusually complex biochemical process on one small rock whizzing around one nondescript star in one of billions of galaxies. And when that star goes out in a few billion years, that biochemical process is destined to go out along with it, with no traces left but a few bits of space junk floating in the emptiness. The Edwardian Ball looks at all this and says, let's celebrate, let's connect. Let's spend hours putting together magnificent outfits so other people can look at them and go, ooh. Let's spend years learning and practicing and playing music so other people can dance and be happy. Let's spend years learning and practicing and performing trapeze work and acrobatics so other people can gaze in admiration. This is what we have to work with. The matter on this tiny little planet, the energy from this average star, the small lifespan before each of us dies, the not much longer lifespan of the planet before humanity is boiled into space. What can we do with it? What are some of the strangest, funniest, most beautiful patterns we can work this matter and energy into before we have to go? The Edwardian Ball is one of my favorite examples of stone soup culture. Of people who know the party will be more fun if they bring their share of it. It isn't just about hearing other people's music, watching other people's stage shows, looking at other people's art. Everywhere I looked, people were dressed to the nines in rigorously accurate historical costumes, in fanciful imaginings of fictional history, in elegant formal dress, in irreverent and hilarious reinterpretations of formal dress, in complicated technological marvels, in artfully lascivious displays of flesh, in elaborate configurations of black on black on black. And people were dancing, creating a delightful whirlpool of giddy, ridiculous glamour whizzing around the dance floor. The audience was as much a part of the event as the performers. This event was not about sitting back passively and waiting to be entertained. It's about being part of the show. When I, Greta, am in a despondent mood, I sometimes get depressed about the closed circle of human endeavor. I'm not naturally a Zen, in-the-moment person. I'm ambitious, forward-thinking, and I like to think of my effect on the world as possibly having some life beyond my reach and extending past my death. It sometimes makes me sad to remember that Even if I mysteriously become the most famous and influential person in the history of the planet, it's still a closed circle. Because life on Earth is a closed circle. And there's no God or world soul to carry my thoughts and experiences into infinity. Like Roy Batty says at the end of Blade Runner, all those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain. The Edwardian ball reminds me, so what? So what if you're spending hours on your outfit just to be seen and admired by a couple thousand other people whose outfits you're also admiring? So what if you're working to make life a skosh more joyful for people who'll be dead in a few decades anyway, and whose descendants will be boiled into the sun in a few billion years? Don't those people matter? Don't you matter? The odds against you being born at all were beyond astronomical. Beating your breast in despair because you're going to die is like winning $1 million in the lottery and complaining that it wasn't 100 trillion. You're here now, and these other people are here. Experience your life and connect with theirs, even if it's just to spend a moment admiring each other's marvelous outfits. The frivolous bits of life are the universe knowing itself, experiencing itself, taking joy in itself. They're the conscious bits of the universe connecting with each other. Through one person handing a cup of coffee across the counter, and another person smiling and saying, thank you. Through one person designing a hot pink dress, and another person wearing it and smiling at the reflection in the window. Through one person painting a picture of a parrot on the sidewalk, and another person snapping a picture of it and putting it on their blog. Through one person writing a silly song, and another person sharing it with their friend, and that friend humming it throughout their day. Through one person taking a video of their cat, and another person liking it on social media. Through one person making a donut, and another person biting into it and experiencing joy. The Edwardian ball reminds me that permanence is not the only measure of consequence or value. The Edwardian ball reminds me that fragile and transitory as they are, experience and consciousness are freaking miracles. And the fact that we can share our experiences and connect our consciousnesses, even to the flawed and limited degree that we do, is beyond miraculous. Let's be part of the show. For me, Greta, as an atheist, the meaning of life is participation, connection, and joy. Sometimes that means dressing up like a character in an elegantly ghoulish fictional world, drinking absinthe cocktails, and waltzing the night away with my beloved wife in a ballroom full of taxidermied animals and beautiful nerds who spent hours on their costumes. Let's be part of the show. And with that, I'll leave it there for today. Thank you.